Hey guys, so we're going to start this review problem. We're going to be working on word problems, adding and subtracting decimals. So this again is for cycle 1B. We've already taken our test, but we're going to finish this up before we move on. So this is kind of a review because all we're doing is we're using the same standard we did last time, only this time we are going to be working on real world problems. So let's look at this problem together. All right, so real world math. Mr. Lambert and Mr. Geiger are in a fantasy football league together, which is true. Last week, Mr. Lambert scored 184 and 3200 points. Mr. Geiger scored 89 and 5600 points. This week, Mr. Lambert only scored 92 and 1300 points, while Mr. Geiger scored 114 and 9100 points. Over the 2-week period, who scored the most points and how many more points did they score? So, we're going to use the cube method on this. This is the way that we go about messing with word problems or dealing with things in real life. You need to be able to go through, find the information you need, get rid of the rest of the information, and then set up what we call a linear equation. So we're going to try to take everything that we need to do and put it in one equation so that we can work it out that way. If you do 3 or 4 equations, you can't get to an answer that direction, but there are a lot of mistakes that can happen when you do that. So if you can get everything in one linear piece or one line, it's a little bit easier to make sure that you're hitting all the pieces that you need to hit. All right, so let's look through this, and first thing in the cube method we're going to do, remember it's C-U-B-E, so circle the numbers, underline your question. Box the operative words that are the words that show you what operation you're going to use, and eliminate everything else. All right, so let's read through this again. Mr. Lambert and Mr. Geiger are in a fantasy football league together. Last week, Mr. Lambert scored 184 and 3200 points. So we're going to circle that 184 and 3200. Mr. Geiger scored 89 and 5600. Okay. This week, Mr. Lambert only scored 92 and 1300, and Mr. Geiger scored 114 and 9100 points. Over the 2-week period, who scored the most points and how many more points did they score? The only other thing I would circle is we need to know this is a 2-week period. We may need to work with that, we may not. All right, our question we want to answer is whatever's going to have the question mark by it. So over the 2-week period, who scored the most points and how many more points did they score? So this is a 2-part answer. I need to know who scored the most points and I need to know how many more points were scored. All right, so we have circled our numbers. We've underlined our question. Now we're going to box the operative words that tell us what we're going to do. So, Mr. Lambert, we're in a fantasy football league together. Last week, I scored this many points. Mr. Geiger scored 89 and 5600. This week, Mr. Lambert scored 92 and 1300, while Mr. Geiger scored 114 and 9100 points. The thing I see here is that I have a last week and I have a this week. So I've got 2 amounts, which means I want to do something with these 2 numbers, probably add or subtract them. If I'm looking over the 2-week period, that's telling me I'm going to do something with these 2 amounts, by putting them together. I want to know who scored the most points. Okay, that means I'm going to take the 2 groups of points and I'm going to add them together and see who had a bigger amount and how many more points. This is going to be an addition problem. This actually, because more is talking about the difference between the 2, I'm going to have a subtraction portion to my problem as well. So there are my operative terms. I can get rid of all the rest of this. We don't really need to know, we kind of can remember that we're in a fantasy football league together. There's Lambert, there's Geiger. Okay, yep, get rid of these things. We can go back through and see through our squiggles, but let's go ahead and squiggle them out so we don't mess with them while we're doing our question. All right. So the first thing I need to do is I need to set up an equation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my 2 things that I need to figure out, and I'm going to figure out what I need to do with it. So I'm going to make an L for Lambert's points, number 1, and Lambert's points number 2. I'm going to call those L1 and L2. And I'm going to put those in parentheses because that's the part of the problem I'm going to work through first. The second thing I'm going to do is I'm going to find Mr. Geiger's. Let's see. I'm also going to need his. We're going to make Mr. Geiger's week 1 G1 plus G2. So that's going to give me my amounts of each. And remember, my other thing I want to do is I want to subtract and figure out who has more. Now, by doing these, I'm going to figure out who has the most points. Now, the part that's might change my equation, whoever has the most points, I'm going to subtract the lower points from that to find the difference in points, or whoever had more points. I may have to switch Lambert and Geiger, I don't know which one, but let's put the numbers in and see how this works out. So, Mr. Lambert, I'm going to work Mr. Lambert's section over here. So this would be 184 and 32 hundredths plus my second week score was 92 and 13 hundredths. Put that in parentheses, minus, I'm going to work that over here in just a second. Mr. Geiger's points, which is 89 and 56 hundredths, plus the second week score was 114, ooh, much more, and 91 hundredths. And that's all going to equal P, or my difference in points at this point. All right, so let's work these two parts of the problem out. So we're going to start with 184 and 32 hundredths plus 92 and 13 hundredths. So 2 plus 3 will give us 5. 3 plus 1 would give us 4. We're going to pull our decimal point straight down. 4 plus 2 is 6. 8 plus 9 gives me 17. And 1 plus 1 is, of course, 2. So Mr. Lambert scored, if I go ahead and keep working this problem through, this equation here gives me 276 and 45 hundredths minus whatever Mr. Geiger's amount is going to be. I'm going to erase this one. It's nice if you can keep it on your paper, but I don't have that much space here where you can see me in the light. So I'm going to need my 89 and 56 hundredths. Again, I'm going to line my decimal point up, 91 hundredths, and then I have 114. So a 4 in my ones place, a 1 in my tens place, and then I have a hundreds place over here. So he's going to live like that. I'm just going to add these straight up with my decimal point going straight down in a line into my answer. So 6 plus 1 is 7. 5 plus 9 is 16. Carry my 1 over. 9 plus 1 is 10, and another 4 makes 14. Carry my 1. 8 plus 1 and 2 gives me 10, and 1 plus 1 is 2. Mr. Geiger had 204 and 67 points. So ladies and gents, this will work out because the points for Mr. Lambert were a little bit higher than the points for Mr. Geiger, so I can actually subtract out this way. So I've got 276 and 45 hundredths minus 204 and 67 hundredths. And again, we're just going to take those two numbers and we are going to line them up, going up and down. 276 and 45 hundredths. Decimal point there. 204, decimal point, and 67 hundredths. And we are going to subtract these two numbers. Now I'm going to have to do some borrowing here. So 5 minus 7, can't do that. I'm going to have to steal from my 4. 15 minus 7 would give me 8. Can't do 6 away from 3, so I'm going to have to steal there. 13 minus 6 would give me 7. 5 minus 4 would give me 1. 7 minus nothing in this column would give me 7, of course, and 2 minus 2 is nothing. So ladies and gents, I have 71 and 78 hundredths, and that will equal P. 71 and 78 hundredths. Now, to answer this question, if this were on like iLearn or this were in real life, we have two parts to our questions. So who scored the most points? Well, looking at L and G, Mr. Lambert's points came up to 276 and 45 hundredths, and Mr. Geiger's came up to 204 and 67 hundredths. So Mr. Lambert scored more points. How many more points did I score? Well, that was our difference here, 71 and 78 hundredths. So this would be your second part to the answer. All right, I know that was a lot of work, but this is how this stuff works out in real life. Sometimes you gotta do more than one step to figure out where you need to go. You're gonna be doing some easier stuff than that on your IXL today. These are all gonna be mostly one-step problems. So get you some paper, make sure you're writing out your linear equations. They're gonna be a lot easier than this guy. Usually it's gonna be one number minus another number, but keep in mind, those linear equations help if you've got more than one step. So write those out today on a piece of paper, on a whiteboard as you're working through so that you can keep track of things. And if you start having trouble, don't let your SMART score keep dipping and dipping and dipping. If you're missing one or two problems and the help that IXL is giving you when you click on the answers is not getting you along to where you're understanding it any better, make sure that you're stopping, calling Mr. Geiger or I, and letting us know how we can help you, because we'd rather help you before those SMART scores get hard to come back from. All right, guys, good luck today on the addition and subtraction of decimals, and we'll see you again in the next video.